Good evening and good afternoon. Welcome to all of you. I'm very glad that we can meet again at our meeting on culture, religion, faith, and society. This time, I'm very delighted to host today Father Gerald Murray, pastor, canon lawyer, journalist, and author of books. Father Gerald, welcome in our studio and hope to have very good meeting with you. Together with me is Zbigniew Przybądźcie, who will be the second interviewer, Szczepan Bartoszko, who is supporting us from the point of view of the IT and the whole setup, and also Michał, who works in the backyards collecting the questions. This meeting is organized by EWTN Poland, by the Center for Christian Culture of Mary, our Queen, the Catholic Association Adeste Fideles, and also we wanted to say that this meeting is around a new book authored by Father Jerry titled Calming the Storm, which was published by St. Paul Center. And you can find information and links how to buy this book because it will be published very soon in April. And the publishing house asked me to tell you that they can offer also some discounts and very quick delivery of the book. The meeting will be lasting 90 minutes and you can ask questions via chat box. Welcome everyone from Poland, Switzerland, UK and United States. We are very glad to have you, especially in this difficult time. And following our good tradition, before we start this meeting, we would like to invite you to pray together Our Father, but in Latin, especially these days for the peace in the world, for the people of Ukraine, for Poland, who hosts almost 2 million refugees, so we can help those people, and for the world leaders and our Pope, so we can really unite and really get to the peaceful solution of the Ukraine crisis. So if we could have the text of our Father in Latin, let's start to pray. Pater Noster, qui es in
celis, sanctificetur nomen tuum,
adveniat regnum tuum, fiat voluntas
tua, sicut in
cielo et in terra. Panem
nostrum quotidianum da nobis hodie,
et
dimitte nobis debita nostra,
sicut et nos dimittimus debitantibus nostris, et non nos inducas in tentationem, sed libera nos a malo. Amen. And now I would like to pass floor to my friend Zbigniew Przybądźcie, who will start the interview. Zbig, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Piotr. Father, thank you for agreeing to talk to us. At the beginning, we would like to learn a little bit more about yourself. So we would like to sort of ask you to introduce yourself to our Polish audience and also to those of us in Europe who are not familiar with yourself. We would like to find out more about you as a person and your life experience. One thing I heard is that you said that your Catholic family and the Catholic Church education institutions raised you to be a man of faith. My question is, how did they do that? And are families and the church today doing the right things to raise new Catholics?
Well, thank you, Zbigniew. Yes, I was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1959, and both my parents are Irish Catholics and very devout. And I was raised, therefore, in a practicing house. We went to Mass every Sunday, and my parents sent me to Catholic school, primary, secondary schools. I went to Catholic grammar schools run by sisters, religious order members, and then I went to a Jesuit high school here in New York City called Regis High School. And that was a wonderful experience, a great education. And it's fascinating, that school was all boys. And it was a scholarship school. So everyone who got in had to perform well on the entrance test. And the smartest kids in my class were Ukrainian Americans. They were really notable for their brilliance, and particularly in science. So I've known about Ukraine for a long time. After Catholic schools, I then went to a secular college, Dartmouth College, which is in New Hampshire. And it was there that there was a wonderful Catholic student center. Dartmouth is a secular school, therefore it's not run by priests or nuns or Catholics per se, but they had a wonderful chaplain. Monsignor Nolan built a beautiful chapel for the Catholic students to attend. And it was there that I sensed the call to the priesthood and decided to become a priest for the Archdiocese of New York. So I entered the seminary here in New York and was ordained a priest in 1984. So I had a very good upbringing, and I encourage Catholic families to send their children to Catholic schools. Now, you have to make sure the Catholic schools are actually Catholic, because some schools have become secularized, and that's a tragedy. And if you're not able to find a good Catholic school, well, then certainly supplement the education your children receive by organizing catechism classes and religious formation classes. And then as you have older children, you really should teach all the subjects that are lacking from a point of view of Christian history, Christian art, Christian music, and try to show children that the Catholic faith has allowed people to develop their intellectual abilities and grow in the faith as a result.
Okay. And when you were going to the seminary, you probably had a set of expectations what your life will be like when you become a priest. I wanted to ask you, have your expectations been met in real life? Is your priestly life what you expected it to be? How does it compare to what your expectations before going to the seminary?
Well, when you enter the seminary, it's you learn that you are now not your own. You are subject to the bishop, and therefore you have this promise to obey him. So I knew that I would be doing parish work, which I have done happily since I was ordained, and currently I'm pastor of a parish here in Manhattan, Holy Family Church, which is near the United Nations. But I also had other interests, and I ended up going to Rome to study canon law. And I had not foreseen that in the seminary that I would become a canon lawyer. But I was very grateful to Cardinal O'Connor, who sent me there to study. I also did not know that I would be doing television and radio work, which I began to do when I came back from Rome. I finished my studies there in 1998. And after my return, then I was invited to do commentary on church and religious news on Fox News, EWTN, other outlets, Voice of America, for instance. And all of that work was something I found very enjoyable, and it gives me an opportunity to reach a greater audience, a wider audience of people, including non-Catholics who are curious to know what the Catholic Church teaches. So it's a little bit like when you join the military, in that you may learn a specific trade in the military, but you never know where you're going to be sent.
I see. So you said you're a pastor in a parish in Manhattan, and I understand it's right around the corner from the United Nations, surrounded by consulates of various countries. Who are your parishioners? Is this an international crowd, or are these New Yorkers mostly? And what type of relationships do you have with your parishioners? What type of age breakdown is there?
Yes, the parish really has two components, because we are the neighborhood parish. This is called Turtle Bay, this particular section of the east side of Manhattan. So we do have people who live in the neighborhood, and others come to the church. They don't necessarily live close by, but they come to Mass. We have a Mass at 8:30 p.m. on Sunday night. And a lot of people like that Mass, because if they're outside New York traveling, they can find this late Mass on Sunday with us. So the weekday parish is a little different, because this is also a business district, and certainly with the United Nations there, most of our weekday parishioners who come to daily Mass are UN employees. Mm-hmm. And there are lots of Catholics of many different nations working at the UN. I've been particularly struck how many people from the Far East, Indonesia, the Philippines, people, that are Catholic. They're not certainly practicing Catholics, and they have a great interest in coming to daily mass. So that shows they were well educated in the faith back at home. And now they find themselves in America and they continue that custom. So, but we have people from all over. Many Africans come. We have a French mass during the week. And then many people just stop in to say a prayer. So I see lots of people coming in and out, and it makes me happy because they're coming in to pray to God and seek his guidance.
And you mentioned the military sort of fate of people being sent to locations that they do not expect. I understand that you were a chaplain in the U.S. Naval Reserve Corps. Was that a full-time job? How long did you spend there? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, I was 11 years a reserve chaplain in the United States Navy. So we served the sailors, Marines, Coast Guardsmen of the United States military. And that was not a full-time, that was part-time. And when I was in, the war in Bosnia was the war that was being fought, but there was not a general call-up of chaplains. I did do Naval Reserve service while I was studying canon law in Rome. So during the mid-90s, I would go down to the U.S. Navy base outside of Naples. And that was also a NATO base. So I would encounter naval personnel primarily from different nations there. And that was a very rewarding experience. I worked with Marines here in the New York area. And yes, it's military chaplains are absolutely vital because military life involves a commitment to put your life on the line to serve your country. And the country owes it to you that you can have spiritual support and religious life within the confines of military discipline.
That's very interesting. So it's a lot of your time you were sort of around men in the uniform in your high school. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience at the Gregorian University? So how did you, I understand that Cardinal O'Connor sent you there. Was it something that you expected? Was it unexpected? How did you find yourself there?
Yes, well, I had talked to Cardinal O'Connor because I wanted to study theology and get a degree in theology. And he said, well, how about canon law? I'd like you to study that. So he came up with the idea. And I said, sure, that's a good idea. Both my parents are lawyers. So I grew up in a house of lawyers. And that's very helpful because you learn that you have to make good arguments at the dinner table if you want to be successful in proving your point. You can't just assert things. So I studied canon law for 4 years, went to the Pontifical Gregorian University, which is run by the Jesuit Society of Jesus. We had excellent professors. One of my professors was a visiting professor who's now the Cardinal Archbishop in Hungary, Cardinal Erdő. He's a historian of canon law, so he came and taught us. And some of my other professors also became cardinals serving in the Roman Curia. But the experience was good because we had students from all over the world. You got to see how canon law is taught in Rome, which is, from a legal point of view, very much based on continental legal understandings, different from American and British common law understanding. So that's helpful. And it's just a good experience to see people from all over the world who are dedicated Catholics, mostly priests and nuns, but also lay people. So I got to meet a lot of wonderful people. If any student is thinking of studying canon law or theology, Rome is the place to go, in my opinion. There are other good places, but Rome, where you're going to learn a lot there.
Okay. And then right after that, you went back to New York, and then you became a judge on the Metropolitan Tribunal, if I understand correctly. What types of issues did you mainly deal with? What is your experience there? Did you have a lot of, I don't know, marriage annulments, and what type of sort of environment did you work in, and how long did you stay there?
That was, I described that in the book. That was not, let's say, the most fulfilling moment because when I got to on the tribunal, I was named a judge, so I was given some cases to immediately start studying. But the head of the tribunal did not agree with the Roman interpretation of canon law. So they were granting petitions for nullity rather freely. In fact, it was basically become almost, it was 99% approval of all petitions for nullity. And having studied in Rome, I was quite aware that the Roman court, which is called the Rota, which is an appeals court, they turn down American appeals on a regular basis, meaning they uphold the validity of marriages that in America had been declared null. So I told the head of the tribunal that I wasn't going to go along with easy annulments. And then he said, well, you can't stay here. So the cardinal moved me. But very happily, he moved me to work in a parish again. And that was a great experience because it was the parish serving French-speaking Catholics in New York, because I had learned French when I was a high school student. So I was able to make use of that and then dedicated myself to parish work, but then also started doing the television and media work and had the time and ability to do that.
Father Murray, there is a lot of misunderstanding what canon law is all about. People sometimes confuse it with civil law, with penal code, and additionally, recently the Pope added to this confusion because he was talking about legalistic mentality and critically speaking of the law to that extent that even a rabbi correct his comments, saying that the law in the Old Testament is important gift of the God. So could you clarify why the canon law, if it is the case, is different than just regular law, and why it's important for the Catholics?
Yes, canon law developed in the church right from the beginning because law is guidelines or rules in order to live according to what is good and proper. So the Christian understanding of creation and then revelation teaching us, God's rules and expectations, that has to be manifested in an understandable way to the believers. And also law regulates social life. So the church is a society spread throughout the world, and it has many different groups of people: nuns, priests, monks, lay people, children, married couples. And how all those people are going to interact and what rules for interacting will exist have to be given. So the church does that. The main purpose of canon law is to promote the effective mission of the church by guaranteeing the rights of the faithful to receive spiritual help. So that means regulations concerning reception of the sacraments, regulations concerning Catholic teachings, how they will be taught, regulations concerning the powers of bishops, how they can rule over their flock in a way that respects the rights of people. Canon law goes back to, as we say, the beginning. It was only codified, meaning put into one book back in the beginning of the 20th century, the Pio Benedictine Code of 1917. And that was updated by St. John Paul II when he promulgated the new Code of Canon Law, so that in 1983. So that allowed an approach of law that also reflected the insights of the Second Vatican Council, but also dealt with the experience that people had gained with the 1917 Code, what was good, what needed to be supplemented. And the Code of Canon Law is continually updated. The popes have done that since John Paul II first promulgated it. And Pope Francis has recently made different additions. He reformed the penal law section because there are laws on penalties. Because one of the things is people can commit offenses against the faith, and those have public consequences. So that's why we have excommunications, suspensions in law to draw back people away from harmful behavior and to embrace anew, the proper Christian obedience to God and His law.
I see 2 points which are quite contagious as regards the canon law. One is the canon which defines the condition when you can receive the communion and when the communion can be refused. And there was a lot of discussions in the US, but also in Rome around that. And the second is under which conditions you can annul marriage, because as I understand in US, this condition of immature personality was abused, was overused as a justification of annulment. And here we see certain tensions between the law, which incorporates the doctrine, and also charismatic aspects of Christianity, the heart and also the feelings versus the law, which is important. How you square that, and how would you comment on these contentious canons, which are important in the life of the church?
Yes, part of the recognition of canon law is that since there's original sin in the world, people's desires are often corrupt or in need of reform. In other words, there are temptations to commit sins and temptations to ignore the rights of other people. So canon law has to restrain bad instincts and educate people in behavior that's going to promote social harmony in the life of the church. That will sometimes cause people anguish, but Christianity never promised, or Christ never promised to his followers, an anguish-free life, that you're not going to have any worries or problems, or you're not going to have any crosses to bear. It's just the opposite. So as regards the two canons you're talking about, first with reception of Holy Communion, canon law says that those who are gravely commit grave sins publicly should be deprived Holy Communion until they reform their behavior. So the reception of communion, of course, is regulated by the principle of theology and doctrine, which is you need to be in the state of grace. And that is a judgment that each one makes. That's why, we tell people, if you commit a mortal sin, a big sin, go to confession before you receive communion. No one may know about your sin, you're the only one, but you go to the priest and you're forgiven, then you can receive. But there are states of life that people enter into which are publicly known, and one of those is divorced and remarried people. So if you're divorced and remarried, then everybody knows, who knows you, knows that your status now is altered. You have a previous marital relationship which still exists, but you've got a civil divorce, or you're just simply living adultery with someone else. That person should not receive Holy Communion. The same applies, and in addition, the law says shouldn't be given Holy Communion if they've been warned. The same applies to people who support grave crimes like abortion. So the President of the United States, Joe Biden, is a Catholic, and he regularly goes to Mass on Sundays and regularly receives communion. But he should not, because you cannot support the killing of unborn children and claim that this is pleasing to God and is not sinful behavior. It is sinful. It's sinful to abort children. It's sinful to keep that legal, by continually promoting it, which is what the president does. So he doesn't like to hear that. And I'm sad to say not every bishop is willing to enforce canon law in this regard. So there was a movement among the American bishops over a year ago to issue a statement about it, because it's scandalous to people to see President Biden defend abortion as he did at the State of the Union speech, and then turn around and receive communion next time he goes to Mass. This is completely wrong, but he did it. And but the American bishops wanted to issue a statement. Some of the Roman authorities in the Curia warned them that they should go slow on this. They should be careful, etc. And then President Biden had a meeting with Pope Francis, and he claims that Pope Francis told him to keep going to communion. And then after he said that, the Vatican never contradicted him. The spokesman did not say the Pope didn't tell him that. So the assumption is that Biden would not go in and see the Pope and then make up a lie and say something that the Pope had never said. So once that came out, then the American bishops basically retreated. They did not issue a statement. directly about the situation. They issued a general statement, which really wasn't received at all as a rebuke of the president. And we're in this situation of scandal continuing.
Mm.
This is something that I guess is connected to the faith in what Holy Communion actually is, the real presence of our Lord Jesus Christ. We're hearing that right now in the United States, there's probably some 70% of people who do not believe that the Holy Communion is the real presence of Christ with body, soul, divinity, and blood. I'm not familiar with studies that are similar to that in Poland, but I'm sure that we may have a similar problem, maybe not to that extent. But the troublesome thing is how did this happen? I mean, how did it come about that people stopped believing what the church has been proclaiming for 2,000 years nonstop?
Well, that survey revealed that 70% figure was shocking, and that's one reason the American bishops have now started a couple of year effort to renew faith in the real presence. So there's they're preparing for Eucharistic Congress, and they're going to have Eucharistic assemblies in all the dioceses. They want to restore faith. Now, how do we get there? Well, we have two problems. One, a collapse of Catholic catechism teaching, which occurred in Catholic schools and in religious programs for children in public schools. They became watered down. So they basically were not serious in teaching a doctrine that the church always taught. So children were not, compelled to memorize anything. The Mass was talked about more in terms of, a meal with Jesus idea rather than the renewal of Christ's sacrifice, and then the Last Supper as the first Mass in which the Lord gave his body and blood to the apostles, told them to give that to others in anticipation of what, his death and resurrection. All of this was kind of the beginning. It is the beginning of the Mass. The Mass was not treated with such seriousness. Now, another problem is we live in a Protestant culture, and Protestants almost universally do not believe that the Holy Communion becomes the body and blood of Christ. So therefore, the ambient culture here treats Holy Communion in the general sense, among Protestants, as just a remembrance ritual, where you think back to the Last Supper and do something similar to what they did, completely ignoring the doctrinal nature of what happened, which is that Jesus was giving his body and blood in sacramental form. So those two factors, in my opinion, led to it. I guess you can say a third thing is when people stop going to Mass, which is a big problem in the United States. The vast majority of Catholics don't go to Mass every Sunday. You lose touch with what you believe in. And then the next generation never really learned it because they never went to catechism and never went to Mass. So, the faith is a complicated subject when it comes to the individual teachings. It cannot be communicated simply by smiling and say, Jesus loves you, be good to your neighbor. That's not enough.
Yeah. We just had a conversation with a bishop from the Netherlands a month ago, and his description of what was happening in the Netherlands was quite depressing and shocking. And I was thinking that it is very difficult to transmit the faith in an environment like that. And especially if you're saying that the bishops were not too keen on formalizing it and promoting it, how much freedom do pastors in the parishes have to transmit their faith, and how do you go about that as a parish priest? How much are you constrained? How much freedom do you have, and what do you do to transmit faith?
No, we're, in our diocese here in New York, each pastor is completely free to do what he sees fit to do to promote Eucharistic faith and faith in general. So, we have adoration in church, we have confessions frequently, we have Mass available regularly, and we have religion class for children who go to schools that are not Catholic. We do not have a Catholic parish school, but we have what's called religious education. And that program is catechism class, traditionally called. And we were free to do as we see fit, what subjects to teach, which teachers to volunteer. And the American bishops are very concerned with this loss of faith because, it's not only in the secular sphere that cultural influences are hurting. In the religious sphere, the kind of generalized Protestant sense, which is, religion is more or less what you think it is. What's ever important to you, that's what you believe. And the Catholic sense is no, whatever God teaches must be important to me, even if I don't realize it at the moment. Therefore, I have to believe everything, and I have to apply myself to that. So, yeah, it's one thing that the bishops have understood in this country, and I hope, in other countries, as the society becomes more anti-Christian, the bishops have to become more assertively Catholic. In other words, you have to defend the faith, because otherwise it looks like you're capitulating. Religion shouldn't be like a place you go to get sympathy and reassurance that life is good. Religion is where you go to meet and follow your God, and that will involve necessarily antagonizing people who don't believe in God and don't believe in morality.
Yeah.
Father
So-
Jerry, you alluded to the thing which is already recognized by some sociologists like Christian Smith as a moralistic therapeutic deism. So people have a set of beliefs which are very lightly taken, and the question is, to what extent this secularization process is pursuing in Catholic circles, and to what extent it goes also aggressively in Protestant circles? And the second question is, can we support each other, Catholics and Protestants, or Protestants are already ahead of us in terms of the watering down the faith and becoming more almost like agnostics? Could you comment on this question of ecumenism? The Pope is promoting that, but is there a space for ecumenism when the society is becoming more and more secular, and Christians, including Catholics and Protestants, are also becoming more secularist?
Yeah, well, to the first question there about, therapeutic type of religion, yeah, religion is basically like taking aspirins to calm yourself down or get rid of a headache. So religion is meant to help me get through tough times. And a Christian or a Catholic would say that's one of the effects of religion, but that's not why religion is given to us by God. Religion is the link that we need to our Creator and Redeemer in order to guide us in the proper way to live. And that will at times cause us to have headaches and sorrows and persecutions. And so we shouldn't try to avoid those. And we should also see that what we owe to God is worship and belief, not the idea that, we'll thank God occasionally, but then we'll make a lot of demands and get disappointed when we don't get what we want. And that's in the therapeutic world. People go to a hospital, they basically say, I got a problem, solve it for me. And in religion, it's not that way. When people come to see a priest and get spiritual advice, we basically can say to them, well, if you do the following things, God will bless you, but you have to do them. I can't do them for you. Now, the second point, ecumenism, I have to say in America, when I talk about Protestant culture, I'm talking what we generally call mainstream Protestantism, which means the original groups that sprung up after Martin Luther and John Calvin, and various offshoots. And most of those have become very liberal and secularized, and they completely reject Catholic morality almost in total. They do not demand belief even in the divinity of Christ. They're basically a pick and choose religion. Whatever you find in Christianity that inspires you, use that, and don't be ashamed if you don't believe the rest of it. There are, however, Protestant groups who are much more traditional in their belief in morality and doctrinal integrity. We call them evangelical Christians or Baptists, people who are convinced that Christ makes demands on us that require our making sacrifices. And the pro-life movement, the anti-abortion movement in America is an example where Catholics and those type of Protestants work together to try and stop the crime of legalized abortion. So though there are those distinctions, on a theoretical point, though, I'd have to say the main challenge to that we face in America as Catholics is to counter the notion, which is essentially a Protestant idea, that everybody gets to decide for themselves the meaning of Revelation and the Bible, and that in the end, it's all a matter of faith. Therefore, if someone else doesn't believe it, well, that's up to them and God. But nobody can say to them, you should believe this, because everyone gets to choose for themselves. And in that realm, that's destructive in the realm of morality, because when you say, for instance, well, God thinks homosexual activity is good, so you shouldn't tell people it's wrong. We just have to say to people, no, that's completely against Christianity. That's not at all something you can defend.
Mm-hmm. Father, we are in the midst of this terrible war in Ukraine, and where Ukraine has been attacked by Russia. And as you recall, Patriarch Kirill of Moscow blessed Russian army which invaded Ukraine. Your thoughts on that? Can the clash between two Christians, I mean, we've got Russian Christians, Ukrainian Christians, mostly Orthodox, but also Greek Catholics, can this be a testimony to the world, and how bad output might come out of this if we see Christians fighting each other? I just recall the First World War when the Christian armies stood against each other, and then the outcome of that was growth of atheism and agnosticism in the years 20s of the 20th century. Could you comment on that?
Yes, no, the Russian invasion of the Ukraine is immoral, illegal. It has no justification at all in any sense. It is an imperial war carried out by a known killer. Vladimir Putin has done this before in other places. In Georgia, he had already seized the Crimea. He's fought a proxy war, we say, in the Donbass region of eastern Ukraine. He's threatening all the time now, nuclear strikes, this and that. The Patriarch has revealed himself to be what people thought, which is basically an accomplice of Putin, that he is not there to preach the gospel, but rather to support Putin and his government. Very disappointing. He should condemn the Russian both its invasion and the way it's carrying on the war. This manner of carrying on war is barbaric, destroying civilian housing, bombing centers where refugees are gathered, indiscriminate destruction. This is all wrong. So, thank God the United States and European countries are coming to the support of the Ukrainian people. They deserve to be aided, and I pray that they win the war, because I don't want to see them subjected to an unjust aggressor who will then carry out human rights violations of the most horrible kind. So we don't want that. We want return to the situation where Russia is in Russia, Ukraine is in Ukraine, and Russian armies are not trying to destroy another nation. Now, for us, this is something that the Americans look at from a distance. I applaud the Polish people for what they're doing, taking in refugees. But this is a tough time for Europe, because they have to figure out how are they going to pay for all of this? Where are people going to live? Let's just say the Pope has said we have to end the massacre. The war has to end. People's rights have to be restored. And then people must be allowed to return to their country with the aid and support and protection provided to them, not just by the Ukrainian army, but also Europe guaranteeing that if Russia ever does it again, they're not going to get away with it.
As we remember, in this definition of the war, there is this concept of just war in the Christian tradition. It has been for centuries. In Catholicism, we believe in just war, though in recent years the Vatican somewhat distanced itself from just war. Could you clarify the concept and also tell us what are the criteria to distinguish between just war and mere aggression? Take, for example, Second War of U.S. in Iraq, where the Pope John Paul II warned the President Bush not to go there, and then we had ISIS, the destruction of Christian culture, NATO bombing in Serbia. How to square the concept of just war and what's happening in recent years?
Yes, well, the just war concept came up. It was developed. St. Augustine spoke about it. And then it was developed further by theologians and canon lawyers in the Middle Ages. It basically is a recognition that in a fallen world, there will be times when force, meaning deadly force, weaponry, and things of that sort will have to be used to stop an unjust aggressor, and or to disarm a tyrant who's killing his own people. There are different criteria for the war. Essentially, it has to be in defense of something that is good in and of itself. It has to be conducted in a way that respects the rights of innocence. It also has to be a good prospect of success in the war. That's always a matter of prediction because we don't see the future. But, you know, it's to invoke it in individual cases, that's up to the civil government. And Christians should advise them to only engage in just war and to resist the tendency that we see now with Vladimir Putin, which is he's got a big army against a smaller country and he wants that land, and then he makes up all kinds of reasons why it's good for him to do it, and then he goes ahead and does it. That's wrong. He's you know, but should the Ukrainians be armed in order to defeat the Russian army? Absolutely. That's completely just. Yeah, the examples. The United States was attacked by the Empire of Japan in December of 1941, and the United States declared war on Japan, and then Adolf Hitler declared war on the United States a few days later. So then the United States entered the war, and thank God they did, because Hitler needed to be defeated. He was an evil, brutal, murderous dictator. And the Japanese Empire, likewise, they were murderous, brutal armies and the Navy. And it was the war in the Pacific, defeating the Empire of Japan, was a completely just war on the part of the Americans to defeat that enemy. Other wars we can debate. For instance, if you go to the Balkans, I think the people in Kosovo were happy not to be subjected to the Albanians. Were happy not to be subjected to the Serbians. That's an ongoing fight. I'll let you guys talk about it, but it's not always quite clear. When you're talking about these conflicts, which are based on ethnic claims and historical disputes, say, well, that's unjust for you to do that. Well, we can discuss that with more information. I'll leave that to you guys.
Mm-hmm. Maybe let's then turn to your book for a second. Your recent book is coming out in April in a paper form, and I understand it could be available right now if somebody orders it through the website. You called it Calming the Storm. What are the key messages of this book? What storm do you have in mind, and how could it be calmed?
Yes, the book that I did with Diane Montagna, who is a Vatican journalist, a well-known reporter and analyst in Rome. And she did a book with Bishop Athanasius Schneider a few years ago, which was an interview book that she did with him. And it was an excellent book. I believe it's available in Polish now, or will be. It's been translated in multiple languages. And Bishop Schneider basically told his life story and then analyzed the crises facing the church and society as he's experienced it. He's a bishop in Kazakhstan. He's originally ethnically German origin, and then left the Soviet Union when he was young and ended up in West Germany, and there decided to become a priest. It's a very wonderful story. So Professor Scott Hahn, who is a biblical scholar here in America, he founded a publishing house called Emmaus Road Press. and they publish books for a wide audience, Catholic religious themes. So he asked Diane Montagna, who had interviewed Bishop Schneider, if she would interview me. And the reason is by my regular appearances on EWTN TV, I've become known to people as a commentator, an analyst of different problems in the church and the world. So we sat down, did the book, we met together in New York a year and a half ago, recorded our sessions. Diane prepared the framework. She decided to take the miracle of the Lord calming the Sea of Galilee. When the Lord was crossing the Sea of Galilee, he was asleep in the boat. He was so tired, a storm came up. The apostles woke him, said, complaining, "Don't you care? We're about to perish." He said, he calmed the seas and then rebuked the apostles for their lack of faith. So that theme is taken as a way to reflect on the current storms, which basically have to do with doctrine and philosophy. So theology and philosophy in the modern world are subject to all kinds of revisions and contradictions that affect the life of the church: relativism, subjectivism, complete denial of human nature, man and woman, the so-called transgender movement, things of this sort. So we look into those questions and try to interpret it. So she takes a scriptural line in sequence and bases the chapters of the book on that from the account of our Lord calming the storm. And it's for us in America, this book hopefully will help people to both understand how to approach problems in our own society, but I hope it has an appeal to Europeans and people from Africa and South America and Asia, because the problems that we have here are often the same, or the problems they're going to see down the line. And we want people to be reassured. Number one, Catholic doctrine remains true, even if it's contradicted. And the traditional philosophy, a realist metaphysic based on Aristotle and St. Thomas Aquinas, that is still true and the most useful way to interpret reality and to understand the nature of things. So we should not drift off into philosophical theories in which everything is everything or nothing. In other words, there's no fixed nature, there's no fixed purpose, there's no predictability. Everything is up for grabs, and we want to counter that.
Mm-hmm. And so a lot of what you're describing is confusion in terms of philosophy, in terms of theology. But how much of that confusion is stemming just from the sheer fact that some of the key moral teachings on sexuality are being questioned by various circles, even in the church in Germany or in Luxembourg or even in the Vatican?
Yep, no, this is a problem. And basically, modern man has become addicted to sexual pleasure as the supreme good. And it's not. The supreme good is loving God, serving our neighbor, using the created world for God's purposes. And sex is good and holy and wholesome within marriage, because sex is not something that's made by God for any other reason than to propagate the species within a loving relationship of a husband and a wife. That's what sex is all about. Everything else, pornography, immorality, homosexual acts, things of this sort, that goes against the purpose and nature of sex. So when people do that, then they begin, when they accept a bogus idea or false idea of what it means to use God's gift of sexuality, then they start questioning the creation. So we have now people saying that a man can become a woman simply by declaring he's now a woman. And we have a case of a swimmer here in the United States who was on the swim team, University of Pennsylvania, as a man, which he is. He's a man and he never can be anything else. Then he says, well, I'm going to become a woman, and he takes some, hormone suppression and then claims to be a woman. He's not a woman, and he just won a race in the National Collegiate Championship against women. And he didn't win the women's race. Whoever came in second, that was a female, she won the race. He was a man racing against women. even if he took hormones. Doesn't matter. He's still a man. So now you mentioned the bishops in Europe. This is really very, very distressing because we have more than one of them. The cardinal from Holland, Archbishop, cardinal from Munich, and now we have the president of the German Bishops' Conference, Bishop Batzing. They're all saying that the church's teaching on homosexuality is wrong and needs to be changed. And they have to change the catechism, and we have to apologize for people because we made them feel bad because of what we taught. And the answer to that is wrong. The Catholic teaching is true. If people reject Catholic teaching and are unhappy about the fact that they can't be confirmed in their errors, that's a necessary and salutary way that God is calling to change. God is calling to re-examine their ideas. The Vatican has not defended Catholic teaching sufficiently, in my view, against these erroneous statements by Hollerich and Marx and Batzing. And this is really it happened a year ago, approximately. The Congregation of Doctrine of Faith issued a document stating the Catholic priests cannot bless homosexual unions. So if somebody goes to a city hall and then, gets married according to civil law, 2 men or 2 women marrying each other, they can't then go to the church and have the priest bless their rings or bless them. Well, as soon as they issued that document, bishops in Europe started rebelling against it. And in Germany, they had a protest in which a number of priests actually performed blessing ceremonies for homosexual couples. The Vatican said nothing to stop them, didn't discipline them. It was really, really, really bad. And it's only gotten worse because a year later, after that document, we now have 2 cardinals and a Bishops' Conference president in Germany pushing this line even further. And no, this is apostasy in the real sense, meaning abandoning the truth in favor of error. And that has to be identified as such and needs to change.
Okay, and since the Vatican is not correcting these bishops, and since we are sort of witnesses of some strange and sometimes very confusing statements of the Holy Father, Pope Francis, during his airplane conferences and various interviews, how should we, as lay faithful, take all this? What is the right way to approach those various announcements of the Vatican? What are we bound by, and what is just the private opinion of the Pope that we shouldn't be too concerned about?
Yes, well, I mean, we owe respect and obedience to the Pope. He is the supreme authority in the Church. He is the, Vicar of Christ. He's the Bishop of Rome. He's the successor of St. Peter. But if he says something that plainly contradicts church teaching, then we have to say, Holy Father, you've made a mistake. Now, he said in an interview done by a filmmaker that the church should support civil unions for homosexuals. He wasn't saying the church should bless them, but he said civil authorities should establish civil unions for homosexual couples. He then repeated that in another context and said the same thing and said, I've always said that, which goes back to the time when he was Archbishop in Buenos Aires. Well, Cardinal Ratzinger had said the exact opposite of that, and this was a document that was approved by St. John Paul II. And that document from the Congregation of Doctrine of Faith said the church can in no way endorse sexual union, or any civil unions for homosexuals because it gives the impression of approving of sinful behavior. Now, Pope Francis did issue that approved of the document that a year ago the congregation said about not blessing homosexual unions. But Pope Francis said that the civil government should do that, meaning he thought that this was a good thing. It's not a good thing because the civil government is giving the indication to people that this behavior is good in and of itself and that the authority of the church approves of this behavior on their part. That's a big error. The Pope made a mistake here. It should not be approved. Now, people say, how can you, a simple priest, criticize the Pope? And the answer is, all I'm doing is quoting what his predecessor stated. I'm not the authority here. The authority is the Catholic doctrine as taught all the time. There was never a saint or pope ever in the history of the church to say that two people who commit homosexual acts should be recognized by the government as having a new civil status. Never said that. So to contradict the Pope in that is an act of charity. You're telling Holy Father you've made a mistake here. So that, this is something you have to say that, when there's silence from Rome about Cardinal Hollerich and Cardinal Marx and Bishop Batzing, that gives the appearance to people that the Pope really doesn't care that they said those things. And you may remember a few years ago, Cardinal Robert Sarah was the head of the Congregation for Divine Worship. And he gave a nice speech in which he said to people, I encourage you to celebrate Mass ad orientem, facing east, which is completely legitimate in canon and liturgical law. It was never forbidden. It just went out of favor when Mass could be offered facing the people. Well, Cardinal Sarah, after that speech, he was called in by the Pope, who wasn't happy he said it. So you have to say to yourself, Holy Father, Cardinal Sarah said nothing more than what's permitted by church law. He gets criticized by you, and yet Cardinal Hollerich denies the truth of the catechism on homosexual activity, and he's met with silence. This is not right.
So how can an average Catholic find out what the official binding teaching of the church is? We read that Cardinal Dulles distinguished there are four categories of teaching of the church, and they are dogmatic statements, definitive declarations, non-definitive but obligatory teaching, and contingent application of doctrine. Now, how can we as lay people find out which one we are dealing with? Can you sort of guide us here a little bit on how to read these papal statements in that respect?
Well, yes, and those degrees of distinction in Catholic teaching are a little bit complicated to try and lay out. You have to basically give a college series of lectures on those. But I would say this, if whatever has been taught up to this point and is found in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, that's what we're supposed to believe in. If something is not contained, a new bishop or someone comes along and teaches something not found in the Catechism or contradicts it, then you're very correct in concluding that man is making an error, that he should not teach that. And, there are plenty of books which Catholic teaching has been laid out and explained, particularly books designed for people converting to the faith, summaries of the teaching and things of that sort. And then in the modern world, you have, through the internet, you have access to many different well-reasoned presentations of Catholic teaching, so you can find things that will be helpful. Our presumption is that the Pope is always going to be teaching the Catholic faith. So you go in, the working presumption is what the Pope says is accurate. But if the Pope says something, as I just alluded to, about that civil unions, governments should establish civil unions for homosexuals, that doesn't sound right. Then you do your research, you find what Cardinal Ratzinger and Pope John Paul II taught, and you say, no, this is a mistake. And that's the same happened with Amoris Laetitia, in which the Pope said that some people in invalid second marriages should be given Holy Communion, which contradict directly what Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict had taught. And that's easily verifiable. We had the dubia cardinals, 4 cardinals, raise those questions with the Pope, and the Pope chose not to answer them. So you say to yourself, their question was simply summed up was, Pope Francis, how can we reconcile what you say in Amoris Laetitia with previous teaching? And he did not answer their questions. And that, I think, is regrettable, because I don't think they can be reconciled, but it would be worth hearing the Pope's point of view on it. So right now we just say, well, I follow the papal teaching on this, but meaning the teaching of John Paul II and Pope Benedict. So
in this respect, the Pope exercised his power to not respond to these dubia, and that kind of raises a question of what is the appropriate exercise of power in the church and what is an abuse of power, and is the Pope above the magisterium? Is he above the canon law? It's a provocative question, of course, but can he change the catechism at will and against the 2,000 years of tradition? And by saying, that he's reading the signs of the times and doing the discernment, the word that's so fashionable these days.
Well, the Pope can change the words in the catechism because, he's the one that controls that book. But if the word change doesn't reflect Catholic teaching, then you should ignore it. One perfect example is capital punishment. The Pope has changed the catechism of the Catholic Church on capital punishment, saying that it's inadmissible. And then he's basically stated on various occasions his opposition to capital punishment. And the reason is, he says it's a violation of human dignity to execute criminals. The church has never taught that. In fact, the church taught the exact opposite, that the secular authority has the right in grave cases of grave crime to inflict the death penalty, and that's the appropriate penalty for certain crimes. And that goes back to the revelation contained in the Old Testament, that God himself gave the people of Israel certain injunctions about punishing with the penalty of death certain offenders. It says in the Old Testament, he who spills blood, his blood shall be spilled. In other words, penalty for murder is the death penalty. So there's an example. The death penalty is not popular in modern Western societies. It's viewed as not necessary. And it's up to the society if people want to vote in or out in their laws. But you can't say that it's immoral. I don't think you can't say it violates human dignity, because God himself, revealed that to be a just penalty in the Old Testament. And then the Catholic Church, St. Thomas Aquinas, explained why this is something that is not immoral, and that it's not it's not a violation of the commandment not to kill, because the commandment not to kill is for innocent people. And then you go, what is the nature of punishment? If it's immoral to kill criminals who have already accomplished their crimes, is it immoral to kill a criminal in the accomplishment of a crime? So if a man is approaching you with a gun and threatening to steal your money, can you or the policeman shoot him before he does it? The church has always said yes, and you have to basically, the law of self-defense doesn't cede because there's an absolute prohibition of killing anyone. No, same with soldiers. The Ukrainian army right now is not committing sins by invading Russians. That's not a sin to do that. And the church has always taught that. So these are examples. The Pope himself has said that criticism is good, and he's welcomed people to speak their minds. Other people say, oh, he's the Pope, you shouldn't criticize him, it scandalizes people. No, that's hyper-papalism of the same sort, which basically implies the Pope makes no mistakes, and if you claim he made a mistake, automatically you're wrong. The Pope himself, in the case of Chilean Bishop Juan Barros, insisted that Bishop Barros was innocent of claims that he had facilitated and hidden crimes committed by a priest in Chile. The lay people said, Holy Father, you're wrong. And he told them, you're calumniating Bishop Barros. The people kept insisting. The Pope sent in an investigator, Bishop Scicluna, and in the end, Scicluna and the Pope concluded that Barros was in fact guilty, and Barros quit his job under pressure from the Vatican. So, and the Pope admitted that he had been wrong because he met with the Chilean bishops and he had made a mistake. This is the goal. Isn't to say, oh, good, we got the Pope to admit he made a mistake. Now we're happy. No, we want to say to the Pope, this is the reason why legitimate criticism is helpful, because it will help you to see that in every question that comes forward, the fact that you have one conviction is not the whole story. It's good to compare, contrast, learn, question. So with the dubia cardinals, for instance, it's not useful to say, I'm not going to answer your questions because I don't like where they might lead to. The answer is, we all have an obligation to the truth. Let's sit down And I'd like to answer what you say because I want to help you and help me to understand the truth here.
Let's move now to the big question which we are facing now, the tension between charity and prudence. As you know, in Poland, we've got almost 2 million refugees, and Polish people very warmly receive these poor people escaping tragedy of destruction, and those who lost their beloved ones and who wanted to have peaceful life, and they were received in Polish homes. We face major challenges, organizational and other. And of course, we want to help. And many people ask questions: how long it would last? How long we can really support these people? Because we've got also some limitations of our resources. Could you give your take on how to balance the charity, which is in immanent feature of Christianity, and we will respond to the Christ for our deeds, charitable deeds, and also protecting our family, parish, country, and balancing these two, prudence and charity. Your take on that?
Yeah, well, I applaud the Polish people, the Polish government for being so generous in not closing its border and in fact facilitating the entrance of refugees from Ukraine. These are war refugees. In other words, these are people who had no idea that they were going to be living in Poland 4 weeks ago, before Putin invaded. And now many people did flee before Putin invaded, so there's that is added in the Polish case to that. But no, it's I think Poles are giving an example of the Christian spirit in the Polish nation, which is when your neighbor's in distress, you don't ignore your neighbor, you help your neighbor. But there are limits. Poland is a country with limited resources, as is every country. But the Poles need to then cooperate with the fellow European nations in helping to move some of the refugees out of Poland into other countries, Spain, France, England. There are lots and lots of other countries which could accept these refugees and assist the Poles in not being overwhelmed. So it's not uncharitable to say to refugees, we'll take you in, but this may not be your final destination. And if you're willing to accept that, then please stay here. I think the Catholic Church can give a great impetus to this, because since the Church is present in all these countries, they can cooperate in helping to find places. But the tragedy here is just stupendous, and the only way that this situation is going to return to normal is if Ukraine is free once again and people feel assured that they can go back to their homes safely. But then European countries in the United States are going to have to help pay for the rebuilding of the Ukraine, because the destruction of property is quite significant, and infrastructure, and that's rebuilding Poland after the Second World War, that took a long time. So this is a long-term crisis, and I'm glad that the Europeans are united in supporting the Poles, and I hope supporting the Ukrainians, and that the Poles will find similar union in trying to move refugees to other places where there's more space and resources.
Yeah, and we now perhaps could talk about the relation between the Church, the Vatican, with countries like Russia, China. These are difficult relations, and of course Pope tries to bring peace, and he talked to Russian authorities, to Patriarch Kirill, and he announced also the consecration of Russia and Ukraine to Our Lady. Could you comment on how, in your view, the Vatican should shape their relations with difficult countries like China, which is authoritarian dictatorship, persecuting Christians, Uyghurs, and we've got this secret agreement between Vatican and China, which didn't contribute to greater freedom, religious freedom. How to view that? We had similar experience during communist time, when Archbishop Poggi and Casaroli came to Poland and negotiated behind the shoulders of the blessed Cardinal Wyszyński with the communist government. And there is even an episode when Archbishop Poggi was persuaded by communist government to take part in 1st May parade organized by Communist Party. Fortunately, Cardinal Wyszyński stopped him. This kind of mistakes tend to repeat by Vatican diplomacy. Could you comment on that? Because this is a very tough topic for many of us.
No, and Cardinal Wyszyński is one of the heroes of the post-war Europe, because he helped safeguard the rights of the church in Poland, and he favored Cardinal Wojtyła to become Pope. So he gave us a great gift to the Universal Church. No, the story of Catholicism in Poland after the Second World War should remind us that those that try to make deals with communists never succeed in getting what they expect. But the communists get what they expect, which is more control and more reputational power, to say, well, to the other nations, the Catholic Church has no problem negotiating with us. You should have no problem. The China secret deal, which allows the Communist Party of China to have a say in the picking of bishops in China, is a disaster. And Cardinal Zen, who is the retired Cardinal Archbishop of Hong Kong, he has said this repeatedly over and over again, and the Vatican has ignored him. The Vatican itself has admitted that what they hoped to get from the deal didn't really come through, yet the deal has been renewed. It's never been published. It's not a good idea, if you're trying to convince people that what you're doing is right, that you won't actually let them see what you're doing. But that's what's going on here. So in dealing with Kirill, the Pope was direct with him. The Pope a few days ago said to the Russians, stop the massacre. He said again today, earlier in Rome, again condemning this aggression. So he has been forthright, while at the same time trying to maintain those open lines of communication to try to convince the government of Russia to stop this. The Vatican's interest is the end of the war, but in the meantime, they also want to be able to get humanitarian aid and facilitate the evacuation of refugees, which are good things in and of themselves. The Russians are the ones who will determine whether that happens or not, because they're the ones who control whether they want to keep waging war. So, yeah, it's the Vatican diplomacy, of course, the goal is to promote the mission of the church, but sometimes the way they choose to do that is not clearly in line with past experience. So the Ostpolitik that you referred to, involving Cardinal Casaroli, was largely exposed after the fall of communism to have done no real good for the church. It was rather the underground and the resistance in Poland that set the stage for, the maintenance of the faith in those countries. If people oppressed by communism get the impression that the Catholic Church is fine with that happening, as long as the communists give them a few things, then once the communists are defeated, then people turn around and say, well, you weren't our friend. You weren't the one supporting us. And that's, George Weigel has stated quite clearly in some of his writings that when communism ends in China, who's going to look good to the Chinese people? Probably not those that have made an agreement that let the Communist Party help name bishops in China.
Father, Piotr had mentioned the plan of the Pope. I'm sorry, I'm hearing an echo.
We need to unmute. We need to mute myself and Father Jerry.
Okay, Father. Piotr has mentioned the plan that the Pope has to consecrate Russia and Ukraine to the Immaculate Heart of the Virgin Mary, as requested by the bishops in Ukraine, and as was requested by our Holy Mother many years ago. And it ties a little bit to the previous era of the Ostpolitik of the Vatican that sort of said that we shouldn't do this in the past, and some of the great and holy popes refrained from actually performing that public consecration with all the bishops of the world in union with the Pope. And it seems that Holy Father Pope Francis is going to do this on the 25th of March. Do you have an opinion? Do you have a reflection to share on that? In terms of what could be the spiritual fruits of that, and what could be the political repercussions?
Yeah, no, this is a wonderful thing the Pope has done. And not only did he announce that he will do it, today the Vatican has announced that he's invited all the bishops of the world to do the consecration with him. And the text of the prayer is going to be sent to all the bishops of the world. So I'm looking forward to worldwide gatherings of bishops and their priests and their faithful in cathedral churches throughout the world, consecrating Russia and Ukraine to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, begging through her intercession the gift of peace, the end of warfare, the gift of being able to restore the freedom and security of the people of the Ukraine, and then having a transformative effect in Russia, that the warlike instincts of Putin will be restrained, and that the people will be able to live at peace with their neighbors. Because, of course, the fear is that if Putin is successful in the Ukraine, he might invade other countries where he has all these false claims he's making about, Russian people being offended by former Soviet satellites and the like. So this is a wonderful thing the Pope has done. Now, the consecration has been done in the past, and there are debates whether it was accomplished or not. Well, the Vatican did say, John Paul II, that the consecration was done by him. Sister Lucia said the consecration was done. But, you can reconsecrate, because that's really what we do as priests. We celebrate Mass every single day. We beg for the same thing every single day. So we can ask Our Lady in a renewed fashion. Now, the public effect of this will teaching a valuable lesson to the world is what man cannot solve, God can solve. And we turn to God and ask him in his mercy to intervene. And his ways are mysterious, so we may never know what happens out of sight. But we do pray that there will be an end to this violent attack and killing and murderous killing of innocent people, and threatening to, the war is now getting closer and closer to Poland. The war machine of the Russians going all the way to the Polish border. We don't want to even think about that. But that's what we're praying to God to avert.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let me shift to another topic. I'm not sure how big this topic is in the United States, but here in Poland, we are in the middle of a synodal way process. So the synod on synodality, and it's been organized in our parishes and in our decanates and in our dioceses. How does that transpire in the United States? How is it organized in your parish and diocese? And do you see the goals of the synodal way and sort of the way that it is operating as conducive to the revival of the faith and unity of the Church?
Well, the synod on synodality is kind of a vague notion in the first place, because synodality is basically, the Pope is casting it as, accompaniment and walking together. And it's kind of vague. We want to promote mission and participation and communion. These are the major themes being given, but the specifics are not quite clear. How it's being organized in my diocese, there are going to be meetings in different areas of the diocese where many parishes will be invited to go to one parish. And then the participants, which are supposed to be the parishioners from the different churches, will get together and discuss what they think is important for the life of the Church. There's not much enthusiasm for it, I see, in general in the United States, because it's so vague. What does this mean? The bishops are the ones who are going to be discussing things in the year 2023 in Rome. All previous synods, the Vatican is the one that sets the topic and then seeks opinions on the topic, basically from bishops and their experts, And then the topics are discussed. The idea that, a one-time meeting of a group of parishioners with some vague criteria is going to lead to some significant proposals it's unrealistic. Now, the one place where this synodality is taken very seriously is by the German bishops and their staff, because the bishops' conference in Germany has a lot of money, so they have big lay staffs, largely populated by people who do not support with any enthusiasm the doctrine of the church. So the synodal way in Germany is promoting women priests, legitimizing homosexuality. They also want to end the celibacy of the priests. So these are all radical proposals from the 60s and 70s that are getting, represented again as somehow the way to solve the decline of the church. I disagree 100% is the way to continue the decline of the church. And then with these bishops, we were talking about promoting homosexuality. You really wonder, is that going to be the main topic at the synod discussion, promoting homosexual lifestyle and then endorsing transgenderism and all these other things which go against nature and the gospel? So, if something good comes from the synod, that'll be a blessing. But I'm afraid it's going to be an opportunity for a lot of manipulation and radical proposals that are going to be very divisive and harmful, distracting from the mission of preaching the gospel.
Mm-hmm. And this process seems to be involving to a great degree the laity, but it also involves people who are not part of the church, people who renege from the church, apostates, people who are open enemies of the church at times. And one of the problems that is describing that the church has is clericalism. And it says that clericalism is the source of the problems in the church today. And my question to you is, would you be able to share your opinion whether you see that clericalism is such a key problem to the church? And if so, how does it transpire?
Well, I would say from the liberal point of view, which is basically the innovative party in the church, the one who wants to change, they see clericalism as the bishops get to decide what we believe in and they get to enforce the law, and we don't like that. We want to be the ones to decide. We be the ones to give the law in the church. So they want to democratize the church, which basically means they want to control it through controlling what gets voted on and then put into effect. But there's another form of clericalism which is disturbing, which is what we see with Cardinal Hollerich and Cardinal Marx, which is that bishops whose job is to uphold the doctrine of the faith instead deny the doctrine of the faith and tell people, you should listen to me because I'm the clerical superior here and I'm the one, who's going to guide you in the right path. That's the misuse of the office of bishop or priest. That's the worst form of clericalism.
Okay. Yeah, Father, we have a question from the audience. So if I may, I will read it out to you. So the question is, how, if at all, can we restore the correct understanding of the role of the canon law in the church? It seems that for the great majority of seminarians, pastors, and hierarchs today, it is seen more as an obstacle to their own pastoral practice and ideas rather than a genuine guide having as its end the salvation of souls.
Yes, well, this is a very good question because there's what we call antinomian spirit, which means an anti-law spirit, which is the idea that the gospel is the gospel of freedom and that the Holy Spirit will guide each person in the direction that they should take, and that to contradict people's intuitions or their desires or their way of doing things is an unjust imposition from the outside. So law is viewed as an obstacle to self-realization, but that's not what the reality is. The Old Testament is called the law and the prophets. So the first thing that God gave to the people of God were laws, because it was by virtue of the law of God that they were constituted as the faithful people, the people who knew what God expected of them, and then in turn did that. So that's where we are called to live. According to the law. And in the Catholic Church, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So, the way means how we should walk or act, the way we should carry out our lives. The truth is, well, what are the things that guide us? And then the life means grace from God to be able to accomplish those things. So that's what we're seeking from God, not this spirit of everyone decides for himself. That is chaotic. And that's basically the Protestant understanding of divine law, that each person, the Holy Spirit will guide each person, private judgment, each one decides. And that's why you have thousands of Protestant groups, each claiming to be teaching the gospel in its authentic interpretation. And the Catholic Church says, while we admire your sincerity for wanting to follow Jesus, this is not in accord with what Jesus actually taught.
Mm-hmm. We are sort of coming close to the end of our interview. Let me maybe ask you a question that is close to the minds of many of us here. What is your attitude towards the Tridentine rite? Do you see signals that it could be practiced, that its practice could come with negative ideological attitudes, with group identity, with a sense of superiority of the participants that might bear bad fruits? And if you see these, what is your advice to those who want to practice it in a mature way?
Yes, well, no, I think the Tridentine, or the old Latin Mass, the traditional Latin Mass, is beautiful. It's holy. It is the Mass that was celebrated for, more than a millennium, and it goes back to the ancient roots of Catholic worship. So I think it's a wonderful thing. Pope Francis has a different opinion. Therefore, he issued Traditionis Custodes to restrict the old Mass. I think that was a mistake. He said that the Mass is causing disunity in the church, that groups making ideological use of it. He didn't tell us which groups or what ideology. He said that the bishops of the world expressed to him concerns about it, but there was a report that's been uncontradicted that the surveys that the bishops actually sent back, in fact, revealed that the majority of bishops either were supportive of the Latin Mass or had no opinion. They were neutral on it. So in other words, it wasn't viewed as a problem by most of the bishops who answered, the majority of the bishops who answered that survey. Now, the Pope recently met with the Fraternity of St. Peter, two of its priests, and they are a group founded originally by people who left Archbishop Lefebvre in 1988 when he did the illegal consecrations of 4 bishops. And the Fraternity of St. Peter asked the Pope if they could continue to celebrate the Mass and the other sacraments. And the Pope said yes, and he issued a handwritten decree to them that they could do that. So, that gives me hope. But then I would ask the Pope, well, the Fraternity of St. Peter is not the only priests who want to celebrate the old Mass and sacraments. So, we'd ask that the same generosity of spirit be shown in their case. So I think we're going to see, as this develops, that the Pope's apprehensions were ill-founded. They weren't the reality on the ground. Most people who went to Latin Mass were not in disunion with the Pope or causing problems in the life of the Church.
Okay. The last question from me is you live and serve in the belly of the beast of liberalism. So we are facing a growing hostility towards Christianity and Christians in the world, and there's a lot of pressure for us to distance ourselves from the world, from its aggression, from the ideology it imposes on us. Should we do that, or is it possible to protect the values that are dear to our hearts in the midst of this neo-pagan life in the large city? So, in other words, the Rod Dreyer's Benedict option, yes or no?
Well, most people can't flee their society and go somewhere else where they won't have the same problems. So I would say the Church has always learned how to carry on its mission, even amidst opposition. And we are meant to be a light to the world. So when the world is becoming dark, we have to shine our light brighter. It's very bad when civil society enacts immoral laws and then persecutes people because they disagree with that. And that's what we're facing in the Church. The Church is facing that now in Western societies, particularly as regards matters of sexual ethics. So, yeah, I would say people have to learn to be more self-reliant, and to be able to teach the faith with conviction and support from, the church, but that we're going to have to get used to the fact that a lot of injustices are going to be enacted in civil laws, and that these are going to cause social dislocation and persecution even of the church. But, the price of fidelity is sometimes that we have to bear a cross that is presented to us.
And just to finish our conversation, what do you see as the sources of hope and growth in the church? And what would be your final reflection and message to the viewers in Poland, in Switzerland, in the UK, in US?
Well, the biggest sign of hope is that God doesn't change. He remains the same, and he's always with us. So we're not dealing with a situation in which we don't have the supreme authority of the universe on our side. So God helps us. The truth doesn't change. The infidelity of others who contradict church teaching doesn't make that teaching false. So we have to become self-reliant, confident, and more prayerful, because when we have greater struggles, we need more grace. We need God's help. So there are many signs of life in the church. It can go between religious orders, lay movements, intellectual life. And then the truth itself is inherently attractive. So if we propose the truth, people who are in errors and mistakes, some of them will realize their mistakes and convert. And that's a sign that, the truth itself continues to have power in our society.
Father, could you give us your priestly blessing to end this meeting? And I would like to express our deep appreciation and gratitude for this meeting, for your wisdom, for sharing sincerely and without hesitation your faith and also pursue for the truth.
Amen. Thank you.
Dominus vobiscum.
Et cum spiritu tuo.
Benedicat vos omnipotens Deus, Pater et Filius et Spiritus Sanctus. Amen.
Amen. God bless you. Thank you.
God bless you.
Thank you.